Detachment. By the left about wheel. March.
Better to try than not.
Yeah, fine. Oh, attachment going on the piece. Remove the canvas. We're going to place it on the rock over there like we did yesterday. March. Some get on the other side. I'm going to lift it high. Forward.
Somebody over on the other side.
Yep. Careful of the water. Yeah, threw a lot at me. Okay, we're going to limb into the rear. I need the limber undone. Number 5 with me. Guys, right now, get up by the wheels.
We got chocks under the wheels. We got chocks.
Drive on. We're going to be spinning the gun. Gotta lock that wheel, spin that one. Sorry, it won't be opposite way. And we're going to spin this way. Okay. Swing. Swing it back. Hold. Back in it. Man. Drive on. Into it, lay into it. That's it. Trying to go a little to your right. Push for the buckle. Remember, the gun goes down where the pond is.
Done.
Yep. This is a lot softer.
That's how they carry it. So actually, it's kind of a if we did a maneuver, rotate, you've got that what's called a limber.
Right on.
Yes. And more people on it, we'd like more people to so by having more wheels and more people,
Wheels.
behind you. Horses can be hooked up
Straight.
to the
Straight.
limber pole.
Straight. Very good. Hold up. Further. Swing left.
This also has the
Hold.
ignition box.
Scotches. Let me ask you.
You want it to be as
Front.
far away as possible so if something gets hit, it's not going to explode. This is the limber with the ignition box. That's the gun.
All right.
Okay, if you'd like to gather up, we'll get started here. Come on in. You'll be able to hear and see better that way. Before we do, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to Gettysburg and welcome you out here to the Pennsylvania Monument for our Living History Weekend with Battery B of the 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery. The men and women of Battery B are a very important part of our Living History program here at Gettysburg. This year, 15 weekends, we invite some of the finest groups from around the country onto the battlefield to present Life of the Civil War Soldier programs. We're very fortunate this weekend we have Battery B 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery, and they are all of our groups. They travel long distance. These men and women from Massachusetts and Rhode Island, they spend their own money and they give up their weekends. And if it wasn't for our volunteers, we couldn't offer any of these programs on the battlefield. So maybe we can take a moment, show our appreciation to Battery B, 1st Rhode Island, for giving us the Now what they're going to do for you here is discuss and demonstrate the role and function of the field artillery. You're going to be introduced to the gun out in the field, the personnel that make up an artillery detachment during the American Civil War, and what was fired out of these guns. In this very complete program on the field artillery, they're going to go demonstrate twice for you at a 10-minute interval how you properly loaded and fired their artillery piece. Park Service regulations allow firing of the weapons on the battlefield. Park Service regulations also say we do not live fire these weapons. So when that big boom goes off, there's not going to be a shell echoing down range taking out those tour buses along the Emmitsburg Road. But they are going to blank fire about 8 to 10 ounces of black powder in a blank cartridge. It's going to be very, very loud. So we're going to ask you folks to do a few things. First of all, if you have a hearing aid, you might want to turn that way, way down. Next, to protect your hearing, we're going to ask you to plug up your ears, open your mouth slightly to relieve the inner and outer ear air pressure from the concussion of the gun going off. And believe it or not, that simple procedure will allow you to go home with all your hearing. Also, one more thing before we begin, black powder, it is a Class A explosive. It's very dangerous, it's very difficult stuff to work with, very unpredictable. The men of Battery B are trained and experienced in using that black powder safely. But here in the Park Service, we're looking out for your safety. That's paramount with us. So we like to keep you folks separated from any potential problems that do exist when you handle and fire a Class A explosive. We keep that distance by the means of this very sturdy barricade. So please respect that barricade, do not go beyond it, and also the perimeters of the barricade as well. And then after the program is finished out here, Battery eventually will be heading back into camp. Great opportunity. They have a civilian contingent, they've got their artillery detachment. They'll answer most, if not all, your questions on the role of Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery here at Gettysburg and during the American Civil War. Thank you folks for coming out and supporting us. And I tell you what, for over 25 years, I've worked with Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery, and every one of those years has been a pleasure for me. One of the safest groups in the nation with the black powder, excellent historians, and I tell you what, overall great people. I've just been blessed. And they've also made my stay with them over those 25 years, plus very low key around here. So thank you for allowing that to happen. So to introduce you to the role and function of the field artillery, I'd like to introduce you to someone who's been with Battery B for a very, very long time, 40 years or more. He's extremely knowledgeable, going to share some of his knowledge with you. The battery commander and my good friend, Mr. Phil D. Maria.
Thank you, Tom. Ladies and gentlemen, first off, I'd like to thank Gettysburg Military Park for allowing us to come here, as well as Tom Holbrook. If it wasn't for Tom, these programs would not happen, and we have a lot to owe to him. So we're going to fire one round for you right off the bat, and then I'm going to go through each man's position to give you an understanding of how the gun is fired and what each man's job is. A little background on the unit, and then some shells that we'll pass around so you can take a look at, and overall description of what an artillery unit would have done during the war. So with that, we will fire our first round, and I will warn you when it's going to fire.
Cutter! First sergeant, load! Load! Cannon is. Bring up a round. Shout 1,500 yards.
The gunner has called for a shell, 1,500 yards.
5 degrees.
Number 5 is advancing.
11 seconds.
Number 2 is placing the round in the tube.
Ramming charge. Charge ram.
Sighting the piece.
Gunner is going up to sight the piece. Give the sign he's ready.
Priming charge.
Folks, the primer's now been set and the gun is ready to fire. At this point, you might want to block your ears.
Pieces up. First sergeant, pieces up and ready to fire.
Pieces ready to fire, sir.
On your command.
Gunner, on your command.
On my command, fire!
Now, folks, you see how much smoke is pushed out by one gun. That was a very small powder charge. That was about 12 ounces of powder. During the war, they fired 1.25 pounds to 2.5 pounds, depending on the gun. So you see how much smoke was pushed out by one 12-ounce round? Imagine a full battery of 6 guns. Imagine several batteries. Well, the enemy lines are going to become pretty obscure, so they need to see where those first rounds are landing, because they're going to be doing a lot of compensating from there. Now, as soon as they clear the tube, I'm going to call for each man's position. He will either raise his hand or raise an implement, and I will describe that position. The vehicle you see to the rear of the gun is a limber. It was their version of a tractor or a prime mover. There would have been 6 horses pulling this vehicle in the field. So it's actually kind of close without the 6 horses. If it had the 6 horses, it would have been back there. Each gun has this limber that tows it, and it also has a limber that a caisson is attached to. And a caisson is another 2-wheeled vehicle with 2 ammunition chests on it. So each gun has 4 ammunition chests at its disposal. And there's roughly about 36 rounds in each chest. Now, if we had a full battery here on the field, it would be 6 guns, 3 sections, 2 guns in each section. The overall battery is commanded by a captain, each section a lieutenant. Each gun has a chief of the piece, which is a sergeant, and each gun has a gunner or a corporal. A good gun crew during the Civil War could get off 3 rounds in a minute. That was considered average. By today's safety standards, we're allowed to fire 1 round every 3 minutes. National Park rules state 1 round every 10 minutes.
Okay.
We also double sponge for safety purposes, something that wasn't done in the Civil War. And we also use that crooked handle rammer. Again, that wasn't used in the Civil War. It's called the French rammer. It was used before the war, but they did away with it to streamline the drill. They realized they could get 2 implements on 1 shaft.
First Sergeant, piece is secure.
Sir, we're ready.
The number 1 man. The number 1 man rams and sponges. The sponge extinguishes any lit embers left behind by the previous round. Their rounds are wrapped in a cotton flannel bag, which is very flammable. So it's very important that all of the embers are extinguished. He also rams the charge with a rammer. As I said, we use that crooked handle rammer. It wasn't used during the Civil War. We use it for safety purposes. It puts the man a foot away and a foot behind the muzzle of the gun. Number 2. Number 2 inserts the charge and worms. The worm extracts any powder bag remnants that might be left behind smoldering. Again, very, very dangerous. So we need to get all of that out of the gun. Number 3. The number 3 man tends the vent and pierces the charge. He has a little leather glove on his thumb, which we call a thumb stall. That's placed over the vent, and that keeps any air from being sucked in when that sponge is pulled out. It's a very tight fit, so it sucks air in if it's not attended to. And again, those could fan any lit embers left behind by the previous round. He also pierces the charge with that priming wire, and it exposes the powder bag powder for the friction primer to set off. Number 4. Number 4 man actually fires the gun. That cord he's holding is a lanyard, has a little iron hook on one end. That iron hook is hooked into a loop on the friction primer. The friction primer is a little tube of brass with a wire that comes in at a 90 degree. It's twisted to form a little loop. When hooked up and pulled, it creates a little spark that sets off that little powder charge, sends a flame down into the main chamber, and that's what sets off the main powder charge, which propels the projectile. Number 5. Number 5 man brings ammunition up from the limber to the gun. He never actually handles the ammunition. It's placed in there back at the chest, and the number 2 man will take it out for insertion into the tube. He might stop at the gunner, depending on what type of round the gunner is called for, so we can inspect it and make sure the fuse has been cut to the proper length. 6, 7, and 8 men back here at the chest, preparing ammunition, cutting fuses. And they're also keeping a running total of how much ammunition has been expended. Now there's a chart that should be on the inside lid of that chest, and it gives degrees of elevation, which they can relate back to the gunner. The gunner. Gunner is Corporal Jones. He would have been in charge of this gun, making sure that the men are doing their job according to the prescribed manual, and he also cites the piece and calls for the different types of ammunition. Chief of the piece is our Sergeant Ray Pedro. He's in charge of this gun and the caisson that would have been to the rear, making sure ammunition is being brought up as needed, and he's also watching for the effects of the ammunition on the enemy lines and relaying any information back to the gunner so he can compensate from there. The bugler. The bugler is the voice of the commander. In the din of battle, you can't hear voice commands, so the bugle is the voice of the commander, and any of his commands are translated through bugle calls. Now these 2 young ladies that you see off to our right with the uniforms on, they are vivandiers. Vivandiers were assigned to different units. Sometimes they had husbands or boyfriends that were in the units, and a lot of times they just tagged along because it was something that they wanted to do. Now, during the war, they actually administered first aid. Our ladies are our safety net. When we're in a reenactment, they're making sure people don't come into our safety zone. They're also carrying medical supplies, real medical supplies. In case of an accident, they can assist. And they also do other duties in camp and keep our history alive through what the women of the war did. Now I'm going to go over some projectiles for you. Now, a smoothbore gun fired a round ball, and this is a solid shot. Powder bag, sabot, and projectile. And these came into the field in boxes that had printing on the side of what was in it, but they also were color-coded. Now, they weren't color-coded because soldiers couldn't read. They were color-coded so at a quick glance they could spot what they were and transfer that to the ammunition chest. These boxes were mostly discarded, burnt. Sometimes soldiers would use them for other purposes, but for the most part they're very rare originals. This is obviously a reproduction. And you'll see that the arsenal is printed and the date that the ammunition was manufactured. Now, who was making ammunition during the Civil War? Anybody know? Women were. That's right. The guys were in the field and women were in the factories making these projectiles. Now, this is a shell. They don't know what surface this ball is going to land on, so they have to have a fuse that's inset. And they have that fuse placed back here at the chest. And that fuse looks like a cigar-shaped item. And it's really just paper mache wrapped around a pasty compound of fulminated mercury and gunpowder. And on the side of it, it has little hash marks, which designates 1 second of burn time. And they could cut their fuses from 1 second or 10 seconds and anything in between. Now, when the powder bag goes off and the flames engulf the ball, hopefully that lights the fuse, and now it's burning in flight. About a 60% success rate with that type of ammunition. Now, with a rifle gun, this is what they would have fired. It's a bullet-shaped or conical-shaped projectile. They knew this was going to land on its nose, so now they could have an impact detonation system. So there's a little plunger inside that hits a percussion cap, and that's what sets off the powder charge that's within. A lot better success rate, probably about an 80% success rate with that type of projectile. Now, both the rifle guns and the smoothbore guns could fire this. And this is canister. We've cut a little window out of this one so you can see the little balls inside, and that turns the gun into a giant shotgun. Now, you've probably heard the term double canister. Well, they're taking 2 of those cans and putting them in. They're pulling the powder bag off of one and placing it on top of the one with the powder bag. And that's what they were firing at these guys when they came across the field at Pickett's Charge. They started out with the solid, then the shell, and then they went to the canister. What type of ammunition is being fired? Canister is the most vicious, and that is introduced at 500 yards. When they get to 250, then they go to the double canister. And you ask yourself, how are these guys getting through it? Well, they were getting hit. They just kept going. And there's an account by one of the soldiers in Cushing's battery where he says the Confederates came up on them and didn't see the guns that were pushed up to the wall. You have to realize the stone wall was this high back then. They didn't see the iron guns that were rolled up to the fence. There's a lot of smoke, so they didn't see them. When they realized there were guns there, they basically grabbed the visors of their caps, pulled them down over their eyes, and ran for it. Obviously, they did not survive. And after the battle was over, one of the sergeants went down and took a plank off the rail fence, and he counted 800 holes in one plank. So that gives you an idea of how intense the fire was. So folks, we're going to fire one more round for you. Now that you have a better understanding of how the gun is utilized. On your command, Sergeant.
Gunner,
First Sergeant.
Load!
Load. Shell, 1,600 yards.
Just open!
Now, folks, Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery, was mustered into federal service August 13th, 1861, and they fought for 4 years
1,100 yards.
with the Army of the Potomac in every campaign except Appomattox. They were on the road, first in line, when the flag of truce came through the lines, and according to the regimental history, the flag of truce dipped to go under the guidon of Battery B.
George, please.
Batteries A and B of the Civil War stayed on after the war as state units, and in 1910, when the National Guard Bureau was formed, Batteries A and B became the 103rd Field Artillery Rhode Island National Guard, and that's the unit that we are affiliated with today. We store our equipment at the Armory of Mounted Commands, which is on North Main Street in Providence. It's headquarters for the 103rd Field Artillery.
Ready.
Now, folks, the charge has been pierced.
Charge 5.
Primer is in set. You might want to block your ears.
Pieces up. First Sergeant, pieces up.
Captain, pieces ready to fire. On your command.
On the First Sergeant's command, fire!
Our firing demonstration. If you have any questions, as we say in the artillery, fire away.
Sighting the piece.
Gunner is going up to sight the piece. Give the sign he's ready.
Primary charge.
Folks, the primer's now been set and the gun is ready to fire. At this point, you might want to block your ears.
Pieces up. First Sergeant, pieces up and ready to fire.
Pieces ready to fire, sir.
On your command.
Gunner, on your command.
On my command, fire!